We have got a couple of really interesting topics today, so I want to go ahead and get started. We're first of all going to talk about the lower Snake River dams and whether or not they should stay or go, something that's been a constant conversation for a good 20 years now. I certainly have covered it dozens of times as it relates to being a news story in our region. I have with us today Colin Hastings. He is an advocate for maintaining the dams. He's also the executive director of the Pasco Chamber of Commerce. And from time to time he may pipe up, so I will introduce our second guest to you, who is Gary Ballou. And Gary is with the Port of Pasco. He is the Director of Economic Development and Marketing, and he is very involved in the dam issue as well. And so if he pipes up, you'll know who you're talking to.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm happy to have Gary here. We kind of find ourselves in these situations more often than we'd actually like sometimes, but I'm happy to have him help out.
Yes, I appreciate being here with my partner, Colin, and we'll have a good time. And yeah, good to announce, just in case this ghost voice comes out to say, well, have you ever thought about this? Or,
yeah.
Ghost voices.
Another
all right.
damn voice.
Another voice.
Another voice.
All right.
Yeah. How about we say another voice on the dam?
Oh,
so
sorry.
There you
That's
go.
right.
All right,
people
guys.
might misunderstand otherwise.
Well, we're talking about the lower Snake River dams. So the four dams that are closest to where the Snake River flows into the Columbia River. That would be Ice Harbor, that a lot of people here in the Tri-Cities are familiar with, the Lower Monumental, Little Goose, and Lower Granite. And when these dams were developed, and I'm going to say about the time of the 1960s, they really were for hydropower, flood control, recreation, transportation. 50 years later from that, we've got intense conversation about whether the four dams should stay or go, and a lot of that focus has to do with salmon and all of the related offshoots that salmon provide in this ecological train. So for our conversation today, I want you to know that I too was an advocate for saving the dams 20 years ago because very selfishly as I view it right now, I was a recreation enthusiast, and basically my children grew up on the above Ice Harbor Dam, and we would always put in Charbonneau Park and camp there too. So but now those days are gone. So I have to say that without that special interest of my own, I kind of look at things a little bit differently, and I am open to all kinds of information and new information. And so for our conversation today, I invited Colin because he is an advocate to maintain the dams, but I also told him that I would do a little research and I would present him with some information that other folks have generated, and they don't want the dams. They want the dams taken out. So that's how we're going to approach today. We're going to focus our conversation basically on energy, fish, and transportation. And if you have any thoughts or comments, man, we'd love to have you join us today. Our phone number, 509-547-8726. All right, let's start with energy production. Of these four dams, how significant is the electric energy that they produce? How important is that to the Northwest grid, Colin?
Well, just on the four lower Snake River dams, that's enough clean, CO2-free energy to power almost 2 million households. Putting that in perspective, that is, well, let's take a step back. If you were to remove that stable energy source, that again is extremely clean, and you have groups like Patagonia that have it in their mission to reduce CO2, you'd have to replace that with at least one, maybe two nuclear power plants, or you can have the other stats they have there are 3 coal-fired plants.
No, we don't want any coal-fired plants.
What kind of goes against common,
man.
especially with the movement now, saying that everybody is very CO2 conscious, and I think it's commendable that Patagonia has their mission as well too. I just think that they're misguided on how they approach this, because it kind of is. It makes no sense. It's reverse as to what they're trying to promote. There's not enough wind energy to replace the lower Snake River dams. Currently, right now in Washington State, actually, there is 3 times more energy produced out of the lower Snake River dams than there is wind energy being produced in Washington State.
Yeah, well, one of the things that, as this research I was going to tell you about, which is not research. No, it is me doing research. I have no, I don't know if this is true or not. Friends of the Clearwater, they're from Moscow, Idaho, and there are a lot of groups who want the dams to come down. But they say that the Snake River dams are only producing at 33% of their capacity. And that has to do a lot with river flow.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because at peak energy, you would need actually almost triple the amount of what I just told you in terms to replace that. So yes, the numbers that I've just given you are based on actual numbers. And it fluctuates, of course, depending on water years and everything else, but the numbers to replace that with wind energy, solar, gas-fired plants, nuclear plants are based on the actual production right now. When it comes to wind power and solar, I think, as a policy federally, locally, we should look at the all-above approach. But what the dams provide is, just like nuclear power, a baseline power load. It's windy today, but it wasn't windy 2 days ago.
Right.
And so you need to intermix those, and dams you can adjust to what the wind capacity is for that given moment in time. So, what I see, that there's plenty of other groups out there, a lot of special interests. I see the fingerprints of Patagonia, which is a clothing company, that is helping fund this effort. And they've been around for a long time, but they've kind of made it their top mission. And I think the arguments that they use aren't valid, and they kind of are deceptive. One of those major ones is tying salmon into orca populations, which everybody knows orcas feed on salmon. That's a sustainable food source for them. We've seen a huge increase in salmon returns over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, but you know what? You're going off topic here. So I'm sorry I'm pulling you back, because that's a different area that we're going to talk about. But I want to share with people, I'm back to energy. I notified or emailed Jim Conca yesterday. He's been on the show a couple of times. I see him as a significant energy resource and someone who's very knowledgeable, energy expert. He lives in the Tri-Cities, but he writes nationally, and he writes for Forbes.com. I asked him, how important is the energy produced at these dams in the northwest, to the Northwest Power Grid? How important are these 4 dams? Here's what he writes back to me. He says, incredibly important, just like the ones on the Columbia River. They each represent over 10,000 new big wind turbines. 10,000 each. So that would be 40,000 new wind turbines to replace that, plus a new gas-fired power plant. So that's what it would take in his estimation. And he's, has no sides, I don't believe, on anything. So I thought that that was an interesting perspective.
Well, I think it's a very good perspective. And beyond the lower Snake River dams, you look at hydro in Washington State, it's 70% of our power in Washington State is produced by hydro.
Yeah.
On a little side note, which isn't recognized as a renewable energy source by the state of Washington, that's another issue. I think outside of Washington, most people will see that this is a renewable source of energy, and it's a carbon-free source of energy.
It is accepted that way, certainly. I mean, obviously, it was not here in the state of Washington, so we would go out and develop a whole bunch of other stuff, which we worked at. But here's another point that has been brought up, and that is that the aging facilities of the dams, considering that they were built in the 60s, and the cost that it's going to be to taxpayers right now to maintain them and to replace the turbines. And there's an estimate, and I have no idea if this is true, but an estimate of $1 billion to replace all of the turbines on those 4 Snake River dams by 2030. What do you think about that? Because that, they will have to be replaced. I mean, we're in the process of that now.
How much would it cost to do 10,000 wind turbines?
Yeah, I don't know.
They're $1 million a piece for the smaller ones.
They're $1 million a piece?
$1 million a piece. So you're looking at $10 billion in wind turbines to replace that. So yeah, it's a lot of money, but that is in comparison to they're comparing it to a zero-sum game, and it's like, to make it a valid comparison, you have to compare it to what do you need to do to replace it. And so, yeah, you look at the $1 billion, that's a lot, but the alternative is a lot too. Plus, what's the power worth that those generators produce? What's the revenue that's garnered off that? And I don't know off the top of my head, but I would guess that you would also find that that has a good return on investment, replacing those turbines. Plus, the turbines that are going in now are more efficient, they produce more power, they have better fish survival levels. So replacing those actually will improve the system, how it operates from both a power standpoint as well as an environmental standpoint.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, guys, we got to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to move into talking about what I think is the big issue for groups like Patagonia and others, environmental groups, is the whole issue of fish and the survival of salmon as a species. We're back in a moment here on Meet in the Middle. Hey, we're talking about the Snake River dams today, and there's a renewed effort to remove the dams. My guests today are Colin Hastings with the, he's actually an advocate for maintaining the dams, but he's also the executive director of the Pasco Chamber of Commerce. Also, we have Gary Ballou with us from the Port of Pasco. We'll talk to him about something different later.